So, hi Alan, welcome to Meet the Market series. So today we have Alan Hahn, who is the principal advisor at ADS ADH Advisors. So before we start, we just want to know about you. We just want to ask you a few questions. So based on your background, your past CFA as well as EMT. So are you more technical oriented or are you more fundamental oriented?
I think that's a very good question because they're really two different sides of the same coin. And yeah. I just happen to be trained as a fundamental analyst. Mm-hmm. My background growing up with PricewaterhouseCoopers and their valuation group was purely fundamental oriented. So I would say that I feel most comfortable in a fundamental world. However, I do believe that there is a huge role for technical analysis and it hasn't gotten the due that it deserves. And if you can think both fundamentally and technically, I think you're much better analyst than you are without the other perspective.
So according to you, which charter was more difficult to achieve?
Oh, yes. Well, that's also a good question. I would say the CFA was probably, for me, much more difficult than the CMT. I took the CFA right out of graduate school, like many of you are getting to be. And with the academic background in place, I decided to take the CFA relatively early in my career. Even with the training I had at grad school, the amount of information in the CFA completely overwhelmed me, and without the real world experience, a lot of it was very foreign. So I feel the CFA was much more difficult to pass than the CMT, only because I took the CMT later in my career and I was much more prepared and focused and had a bigger base of knowledge to achieve. But I think they're both equally difficult. They're both 3-year commitments and they do require a very deep understanding of both technical and fundamental analysis.
Right.
From your portfolio, I saw that you took CFA in 1992. That's when you got the charter holder, right?
Yeah. Are we going to talk about ancient history of the market?
No. I also want to ask you, why did you take CMT and you got it in 2010?
Yeah.
Did you feel the demand from the market?
No, there's a lot of different reasons. Technical. There's a place for both. In the world of finance, and it really depends on the type of company you're working with and what your goals are in your career. But nevertheless, they're not transferable skills. You cannot take what you've got as a fundamental analyst and often apply it to the market, although we hear day in and day out about how fundamentals and the markets are correlated. When you really look at it, it's tough to make that argument. The CMT provides an entirely different perspective, and I think it's very important to have, when you're investing, to have a very balanced perspective of what you're doing and how to create a portfolio, and the skills necessary to delve deep into either fundamental or technical analysis and arrive at conclusions you feel comfortable with. So I think they're both very important.
So to what extent do you combine your fundamental and technical analysis skills in your valuation models?
The answer to that is zero, believe it or not. Because technical analysis and fundamental analysis approach the valuation of securities so differently, they are one of the few disciplines within the broader finance application that have almost zero overlap.
Right.
For instance, if I were doing technical analysis, I might use a Elliott wave form model, of which there are no company inputs to.
Right.
But
Yeah.
if I'm valuing a company, whether it be public or private, I'm using financial statements, management presentations, and so on and so forth. And those two data sets don't overlap at all.
And fundamental analysts believe in the efficiency of the market, while technicians don't. What about you? How do you evaluate the market efficiency?
I actually am going to punt on that question, to tell you the truth, because from a market efficiency standpoint, the way that I approach the markets from a technical perspective, the debate about efficiency or inefficiency is irrelevant to what I'm doing in the analyses I'm doing. So I consider that noise within the broader perspective of technical analysis. From a fundamental analysis standpoint, I would absolutely agree that there is inefficiencies in the market. And the smaller your company is and the more illiquid is, the more inefficiencies there'll be. So I think maybe that's helpful on that perspective a little bit.
So how would you value a company that is not public?
Oh, that's what I do every day. That's a good question. I think I can answer that one with some confidence. Yes. Well, there's a couple of different ways to do it, and first of all, I think, and it's generally acknowledged in my profession that the market approach is the best way to value a company. If you can get very recent transaction data, whether it be publicly traded companies or private companies, for similar comparable companies, that's the best way to go about it. Second best way, in the academically correct way or theoretically correct way among practitioners, would be to an income approach. The problem with that is sometimes the forecast horizon, and it's difficult to look out that time period. And there are many different ways to build up a cost of capital and theories on that. So two people can come to the table with very different answers, but have yet used the same approach. So, I would like to use fundamental analysis probably more than technical analysis.
So, say for example, a company like Mars, which is the guy who makes chocolates, they're a huge company,
sure.
And a startup. Is there a difference in valuing?
That's a very good question. I mean, certainly with Mars, if you look at it in its life cycle, it's a relatively mature company. It's a big company. It's got stable operations. It's got stable demand. It's got a lot of predictability in its inputs and its outputs. And certainly looking at that, I would probably use a dividend discount model, to tell you the truth, depending on the stability of the cash flows. A startup company is much different. With no predictable cash flows or even the hope sometimes that there will be cash flows. Startups continue to charge on and raise money, so there's got to be a way to value them because investors are coming to the table and plunking money down and taking securities. Now, they present their challenges, and the best way that I have found to value early stage companies is to figure out what stage they are in and have a database of other companies, not necessarily comparable companies, because companies at this stage of their life cycle all face similar risks, and thus it really doesn't matter what industry they're in. It really matters on the size and the life cycle of their product. And I would be using comparables, and have for a long time, to value the early stage companies. And if you're in the earliest stage company, the rule of thumb used to be, for $1 million contribution, you get 50% of the equity. Now that has changed over the times, but there was enough data to support the rule of thumb. So two different ways to value two different types of companies.
Which valuation models do you prefer to use?
I prefer to use pure free cash flow models, and I prefer to use free cash flow to the enterprise versus free cash flow to equity for many different reasons. But there is once you use the enterprise, you take the whole challenges of debt out of the equation when you value the enterprise, and then you can look at the right-hand side of the balance sheet separately. But to get an idea of what the enterprise worth, I think is important, assuming I want to come up with the value of the company. But if I want to come up with the value of a specific security, obviously I'm going to look at the right-hand side, and I'm going to look at the cash flows specifically to the security. So I guess it really depends on what I'm valuing it and what the purpose is. That will depend on the valuation model that I use. But generally, if the data is available, I like to use a market transaction approach. If it's not available, I'll use an income approach, and the most likely will be a free cash flow to the enterprise.
So what kind of soft and hard skills would a professional need to possess to be successful in your field?
My field would be financial analysis.
Yeah, valuation.
Valuation, okay. Well, I think, believe it or not, intellectual curiosity is probably the largest soft skill that you would need. You just can't approach the job with looking at the numbers on a piece of paper. You have to go way beyond that to think about the company and think and make connections that other people aren't. And you have to be intellectually curious to do that. So to me, that would be the biggest soft skill. The other soft skill is you just have to be affable. You have to be able to get along with a lot of different types of people. If you're a fundamental analyst, let's say you're a fundamental analyst in healthcare, you're going to have to get along with doctors, you're going to have to get along with nurses, you're going to have to get along with ambulance drivers. You're going to have to get along with everybody, because all of those people know important things about a company of which you want to elicit. So to be able to get along with a lot of different people is really an important skill for a fundamental analyst. On the technical side, if you're a fundamental analyst or even a technical analyst, you're just going to have a good command of numbers. And I think beyond just a good command of numbers, you're going to have a very good memory. Having a very good memory is just as important as having a good command of the numbers, because if you evaluate the numbers within a silo, you forget about the last time the numbers looked like that. So having that memory is very important too.
Right.
You have a very sound educational background. You got your MBA in statistics as well as in finance from University of Chicago.
That's correct.
And why did you choose those two majors back then?
Oh yeah, that's a real good question, and it gets a little to the question that you just asked about intellectual curiosity and memory. I did an undergraduate degree in liberal arts, and the liberal arts is one type of thought that operates in the gray zone. It's nonlinear. There's many different conclusions to the same answer, and they can all be equally right. And so you have to learn how to deal with that world of uncertainty and the gray zone over there. That's very important. But that leaves you without those hard skills, those numeric skills, those accounting skills, those statistic skills that you need to evaluate companies in the marketplace. So I went to the University of Chicago specifically to hone those data skills, because they look at the world and say, we don't need liberal arts. We just stack everything in a normal distribution and calculate the standard deviations, and we've got it all set right here. Now that's a whole world that I'd never been exposed to, but it's very common within the equity securities industry. You'll find that perspective much more common than you will a liberal arts. So what I was trying to do is combine the ability to think creatively, think out of the box, think differently, with the hard skills that I needed to, do something like an equity security job. So that's kind of what led me into statistics. From an international standpoint, I went to school in Germany for a year and studied the European community. I also spent a year at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium and worked for Citibank over in Brussels, and then worked for PwC in London. So I've always had an international flavor, which I've enjoyed. I like to go to other cultures and just think more broadly about the world than just Boston or New England. So the two just seemed to make sense to me. It was just building on something that I enjoyed.
And did statistics help you in your technical analysis?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Statistics are exceptionally important in technical analysis, and specifically you'll want to think about the Fibonacci series as you go through and think about statistics.
And golden ratio,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
All of that is very important.
So what do you think about the market in Q4?
Okay, yes, now the rubber meets the road here, doesn't it? Okay, so what is today? Today is October 30th, isn't it?
Right.
It's a Monday.
Yeah.
So the next time I'll be back here is probably in February or March, and these words will be on the record, so I need to think about this for just a little bit. But anyways, we've had a great run. When you think about the low in February of 2016 to where we are today, we're I thought we were going to consolidate around 2,500 on the S&P, but once we broke 2525, the next target in place is 2612, somewhere up in there, if I'm thinking about it from an Elliott wave perspective. And I see that is having huge resistance in that 2600 range. And I think we're going to bounce around that 2600 range from the end of this year. I see us, topping out in Q4, and I think we're going to go into a very soft and very frustrating 2018, and we'll go back down and test 2100 sometime in 2018 before we rally again and see 3,000 many years out into the future. But I think 18 is going to be a very difficult year for investors, if not one that hurts them in the pocketbook, because we've had just a 44% rally off the February low in 16 to now, that we're bound to give some of that back pretty soon.
Did you solely base your analysis on Elliott wave theory?
That's primarily it. Yes.
That's the first time I meet a person who takes this theory, because Patrick, the previous interviewer, technical analyst at Fidelity, he said that he never met a person who uses Elliott wave theory same way, like as others.
Like no person uses Elliott wave.
Yeah,
a different approach to
and
it.
that's exactly right. That's a very good point on his part. Fidelity is a very fundamental oriented shop, and it is got a certain framework and philosophy for analyzing the market and the company that is based on its culture. You won't find too many institutions that have an Elliott wave practitioner or group. I think Goldman has got a few there, and they're very good. I've seen some calls of theirs that could only have been made using a wave analysis because the fundamentals were so different. But Elliott wave is really a practitioner cult way of looking at the market. It's very effective if you can combine it with Fibonacci and other technical metrics such as support and resistance, and it's very good, but it's not something that's going to be ingrained in any institutional culture, and I'm not surprised that somebody from Fidelity would say that. You would meet wave practitioners as solo practitioners who are following specific markets. It's an interesting way to look at the market, and anybody can label 1, 2, 3s, 4s, and 5s on a chart and come up with different conclusions. And so the fundamental analysis, at least everybody agrees on the data set and what it means, for the company. That's not necessarily true with Elliott wave. And to try and explain to clients that you've bought a stock or sold a stock, or you've turned bearish or bullish based on a pattern on a chart, that's a difficult sell at times versus looking at an income statement and a balance sheet and saying, this is why we sold this company. That's a lot easier to grasp. But wave is based on sentiment, and sentiment drives the market. So I don't think, somewhere in your toolbox you've got to be cognizant of it, even if you are Fidelity.
So one of the technical assumptions is that history repeats itself. So what do you think, in which phase are we right now?
I think we're in a very bad phase. I think we're at the end of a 100-year decile cycle, and I see demographics as well as cyclical forces working against economic activity and impeding its progress. And I see that the 1920s will be very, very difficult, I think, for us fiscally. And I think that is going to be a bottoming of the 100-year decile cycle. And I think we're, then therefore going to start moving on the upcycle into a spring type of environment that will bring more prosperity. But I think the 20s are going to be a difficult time for the U.S.
Let's talk about a very
Something more cheerful, huh?
Yes, yeah, about cryptocurrency. I think it is a cheerful topic. Since the cryptocurrency is a recent phenomenon and it is not regulated,
Yes.
and there is no proper valuation of Bitcoin yet,
That's right.
how would you value the cryptocurrency? Do you have any suggestions?
No, I have no suggestions whatsoever, and the best suggestion would be to look at it in a form model similar to Elliott Wave, because if you're a fundamental analyst, what are you going to analyze?
There is no
Yeah,
fundamental
right.
aspect to it. And
That's-
Elliott Wave shows like sentiment, zero sentiments, and then there's a sudden spike in the recent times. Before that, before even the early next, like November 2016, it was pretty much flat. But as soon as the year progressed, there was some spikes in Elliott Wave.
Yes, exactly. So that's my point of why Elliott Wave, I believe, is so important, because it at least gives you some framework when there are no other options
Right.
available. You just may not know where you are on that roadmap, but at least you can begin to think about things a little differently. So I personally am very bullish on the gold market. I think that it was a very frustrating year for the 17 was for the complex, and I think that the rise of cryptocurrencies and your questions about them have two impacts. It just shows that there's an alternative demand for some type of currency to exchange for goods. The second is, how do you value it? And it's all got to be based on sentiment right now. And then I think eventually that sentiment may get unwound a bit, and there may be a place for gold to prosper from that unwinding.
Right.
So that's about how I look at the cryptocurrencies.
So this is a quote from Warren Buffett. He said that I realized that technical analysis didn't work when I turned the chart upside down and didn't get a different answer. So what is your take on this?
Yeah, well, Warren is kind of hard to argue with. He's got a strategy for investing that suits him very well. He knows what his comfort zone is, and he knows that comfort zone very well. And once you take him outside of that comfort zone, he's less adaptable and flexible to certain ideas. Is that right or wrong? No, I don't think so. How could you argue with Warren Buffett? On the other hand, though, I do think it's a little bit of a myopic perspective. That is, if that's really what you see, I don't think you're looking very hard. That you may want to take a different perspective if you want to go outside your comfort zone.
Right.
But as long as your comfort zone is there, he's got the right lens within that comfort zone, so there's no really arguing with him.
Let's move to our final question.
Very good.
Nowadays, the market is full of financial analysts, economists. How can you stand out among all of these professionals?
Yeah, it's really hard to do, and I don't know if you necessarily want to stand out, to tell you the truth, because people who stand out for a very short period of time. They're in the limelight very quickly because they made an outrageous call and it just happened to come true, so there you are, but all of a sudden you're not there anymore. My personal perspective on how you stand out is not immediately. It's over a long period of time, and by doing very solid, good work over a long period of time and developing a personal reputation for quality, insightful analysis. I don't think it's easy. I don't think it comes quickly. I think, it is a career per se, and if that's your goal, it's going to take you a long time to get there. There will be a couple opportunities along the way for you to stand out. There is always, for every analyst at a certain period of time, to really take the data and make a call and be noticed, and you can do that if you're prepared, and you will get those. Whoever you are, you will get those opportunities along your career, and if you can take advantage of those by being prepared, then you can stand out. But it's a long haul to stand out. It's not a flash in the pan, especially in the financial markets, where you said there are so many investors who like to give their opinion.
And so, any advice, career advice you'd like to give to our students?
The only advice why, that's a loaded question. Yeah, I would. I just had the good fortune to return to the workforce after 10 or 11 years of working on my own. And I remember sitting at the University of Chicago and the professor looking out at all of these students who all wanted to go to work on Wall Street and be slaves and make a lot of money. It said, don't be a slave to your degree. Let your degree slave for you. So I took that to heart, and having built a solid foundation with the right professional credentials, I was able to take my clients and run a business for 10 years and essentially remove myself from the workforce and be a parent to my son, which not a whole lot of professionals get the opportunity to do. So I was allowing my degree to slave for me for a while, but it also gives me the flexibility now that I've done what I wanted to do to get back into the workforce and do what I used to do, even though I had taken 10 years time out. So I guess my advice to all the students would be is that there is a period in your life where you're going to have to slave and grind. There's no question about it. But with the fundamental foundation of what you're getting down here and the experience of these types of classes, you can put yourself in a position where at some point along your career, if the right opportunity presents itself, you can do something different and something a little offbeat and let your degree slave for you for a while, because goodness, it's not all about slaving for the degree.
All right.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you.
It was a great talk. We got many insights from you.
The questions were too good. I mean,